the Sounds True Podcast Network. Welcome, friends, to the Sounds True 1 special on the many faces of awakening. This is something that I've been thrilled every time I think about it over the last several weeks, knowing that it's coming up, and here it is. For the many faces of awakening, we have with us Hameed Ali. He's the founder of the Diamond Approach, and he writes under the pen name A.H. Almaas. We're also joined by Zen teacher Henry Shukman. And let me tell you a little bit about the origin of this special event at Sounds True 1. In many ways, the seed of it was planted approximately 10 years ago when I had the privilege of recording a series with Hameed Ali on endless enlightenment. And in that series, I learned many, many things, but one of them was it was a correction in my mind state that somehow I thought enlightenment was kind of like a place I was going to go to and land there and be a somewhere. And instead, it opened my eyes to this notion of endless enlightenment, a living process of new discoveries that who knows what they'll even be in the future. All right, the second input into this particular dialogue is that I was reading Henry Shukman's book, a beautiful book called Original Love. It inspired our team at Sounds True to release a new meditation series with Henry that's called Awakening. It's coming out this month. And in reading Original Love, the final section of the book, he offers something called a taxonomy of awakening. And I was like, Henry, you have a taxonomy of awakening? That's amazing. And he offered 4 different faces of awakening. So these two inputs together have brought us to this moment where we'll be having this dialogue between Hameed and Henry. Welcome to you both. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Tami. It's fantastic to be with you. And you too, Hameed. A great honor.
Yeah, good to be here with both of you.
You're meeting each other for the first time, yes?
It is the first time, yeah.
Yeah. Although I've met Hameed through some of his teachings already, but never in any kind of personal interaction like this.
Yeah, I watched some of your videos. That's how I know some, yeah.
All right. Well, here at the beginning, I'm going to see if we can create some distinctions. And I don't want to lose anyone in our audience. At the same time, I don't want to be Miss Muddy, if you will. Like I've already introduced enlightenment as a term. And then Henry, in referencing your work, I've introduced the term awakening. And one of the things I've noticed is that people often use these terms interchangeably. At Sounds True, we often use them interchangeably. But perhaps they're not simply interchangeable. And perhaps each of you relates to those two words differently. And I think it would be good, just so we actually know what we're talking about with some level of clarity, if you would each describe how you use the term awakening, what you're referring to, and if you use the term enlightenment, what you're referring to.
So I must admit that I use them interchangeably these days simply because I found the term enlightenment possibly a little grand. You know, and so these days I mostly talk about awakening, but I think I mean by it what I used to mean and what my teachers used to mean when they used the term enlightenment. There's another issue with enlightenment because in the Western tradition, it means something quite different from what it means in the kind of spirituality we're talking about. You know, there was the Age of Enlightenment, basically the 18th century, starting in the UK especially, somewhat in continental Europe as well, somewhat even in the pre-United States, which was thinking about, you know, new possibilities for social reform, and for freedom and for the rise of science and scientific thinking over religious dogma. All of that got put under this term enlightenment in the Western tradition, which is what I grew up in. So there's a little bit of murkiness there already for me with the term enlightenment. But basically, if I just stick to the term awakening, for me, it means a couple of things above all, and then it can mean various other things, but some sense that my ordinary sense of self and its perceptions of things has been kind of superseded, has been overturned, has either vanished or somehow, I don't really like the word transcend personally, because I don't think it's about going up above. I think I've seen through it, and I've discovered that there's some other order of existence, of experience, that's always been here, in which I am not separate. I'm basically not separate from anything else. And it's another order or register of experience, another dimension. Where when we taste it, we know that we've found something more real than the world and self that we had previously been kind of thoroughly convinced by. So for me, it's sort of it's got to have some sense of just discovering and having sort of break through to me that I'm not just what I thought I was. I'm part of something much larger, and I'm inseparable from it.
Okay, so I'll tell you what I think. I usually don't use the word enlightenment. I avoid it, mostly because when I first encountered it, I encountered it in the Buddhist perspective, where enlightenment meant Buddhahood. And I don't claim to know Buddhahood, so I avoid the word enlightenment completely. Awakening makes more sense to me, so I agree with Henry. Awakening means recognizing what we are that is not the usual self, that there's more to us or something different about us that is, because the usual self is our psychology and physicality and sense of personality that we develop throughout history, while our awakening is recognition that we have what I call true nature. I don't use the word Buddha nature, I use true nature. So true nature means recognizing I have a realness to me that is beyond the history that I'm aware of, that is beyond the physical and the mental and all that. This is just pure awareness, a sense of beingness and awareness, and the consciousness that knows itself by being itself, and that is beyond anything that happens, not emotional, not mental, not physical. And so it is a discovery. And for me, in the beginning, it was quite a discovery. Big difference. Changed my life. Changed my life. Now I don't have a life. It's just nature. I mean, my experience is more like, reality just happens. Things happen. Things are done, So awakening, that's one thing, bring us to the very heart of the discussion. It is not just one thing. We don't just wake up once. I didn't have just one awakening and continued forever. It wasn't like that. Awakening was the beginning. What I call true nature, which is our essential, fundamental, inherent nature, has many ways it can show itself, which is, I think, why there are so many teachings, so many traditions, each one talking about their recognition of the true self or true nature. Which, when you study the tradition, you see they're not exactly talking exactly about the same thing, or there are many similarities. And so in time, at the beginning, I thought it was the same thing. because remember, toward the end of the 20th century, there was a view that different teaching are talking about the same thing differently. And I first believed that, but then I recognized now, from my experience, they're not talking about the same thing. There are similarities, different faces of the same thing, but it's not the same thing. That's why it's not just different in language. It's actually different in experience, which for me opened up things, made things more interesting even.
There's so much to talk about here, but I think you're making a very important point. And I would say with 90% of the conversations I have with authors and teachers, that sounds true, along with our staff. Everybody's always trying to collapse everything to say that everybody's saying the same thing. These are all roads leading to the same mountaintop. And whenever I disagree, everyone's like, wow, aren't you the downer? You don't really, come on. But I think you're making a very important point, Hameed. I wonder, Henry, if you have a comment about that.
I completely agree. I think, that idea, many paths, one mountain. I see it as many paths, one mountain range. And there are different. So I think of reality, true nature, original nature, Buddha nature, as it's a jewel, it's a prism, and it has different faces. And typically traditions focus on one of those faces. Mostly they go all in on one, maybe not exclusively. Some may be more open to a few dimensions. So I think, we can talk about different faces of awakening in different ways. One is, what is the actual nature of reality, the best that we can know it? On that sort of ultimate level, it shows itself in different ways. And we could talk about some of those ways, sure. But then absolutely, as Hameed was saying, it never stops being a process itself. It's actually, even while we may say it's unchanging, it's also constantly unfolding. There's a Taoist idea that it's blazing forth all the time. It's erupting out of nothing, creating this moment, which is ever changing. But there's something perhaps unknowable or perhaps experienceable yet unknowable, which is not changing. We could come to that. I'd love to discuss that at some point if we can. But our own understanding of it is continually evolving. I mean, Dogen said, he's got this beautiful line. You might well know it. It's quite short, so I'll just say it. To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be awakened, is to have the body and mind of self and other drop away. To have that body and mind of self and other drop away is to be awakened by the 10,000 things.
Yeah.
And the traceless awakening. This traceless awakening goes on forever. Yeah. An awakening without trace goes on forever.
Yeah, and that's why I like Dogen. Dogen had that view too. Because he talks about many things, actually.
That's right.
Yeah. Some of them I understand. Some of them I don't know what he's talking about. But he definitely talked about many things. He doesn't make awakening one thing without him saying that. He just does it,
Yeah. There's one place where he talks about 4 dimensions of awakening. One is just all one. Another is absolutely empty. And another is completely, infinitely creative. And the final one is it's never apart from you, right where you are. Mm-hmm. And I think I love all of the above, but I think it's really important to remember, especially for folks listening, we're not talking about some abstract thing out there that is sort of not really to do with us, where you might be interested in it, you might not be interested in it, you can go and find it sometime if you're curious. No, it's about our very own life. It's important to me to remember that. There's, it's not abstract. It's about the immediacy of our life right now, always.
Now, Henry, you mentioned blazing forth. And in Original Love, that was one of the 4 faces of awakening that really got my attention. And I wonder if you can say a little bit more about it. And then I'd love to hear what Hameed's sense is of how that fits in, if you will, to the diamond approach mapping of awakening.
Well, okay. I mean, for me, partly it came out of an experience I once had where it was very sort of vivid and visceral, where it was as if I could just suddenly see that the entire moment was pouring out of nothing, like a black hole in reverse. It was as if, because I once had an experience that actually, Tami, you asked me about it, this other one time, where there's just really nothing, truly, truly nothing. And I would say not even consciousness, but we could definitely debate that. But I felt there is a zero, but everything is coming out of it. And this very moment is blazing forth out of it. And actually, there's a Taoist teaching, and David Hinton, the Taoist and Zen sort of writer, poet, scholar, researcher, he talks about this in one of his books, that it's a term tu jan, meaning blazing forth, that the Taoist view is there's a fundamental absence, but that fundamental absence is constantly blazing forth as existence tissue, as he calls it, as this moment, as it is. I think, for me, I've never really, I've only got things by experiencing them. I don't really get them just by reading about them or thinking about them. If I don't experience it, I don't really get it. And in Zen, they again, particularly talking about Dogen, there is there's kind of you can tease out a view that, there's some way that everything is one fabric, but that fabric is nothing at all, and yet it's appearing, and yet it's coming forth right now. There's an old teaching in Mahayana Buddhism: dwelling nowhere, mind or experience comes forth. Dwelling nowhere, all this. Our conversation right now, and the 4 of us getting to meet like this, it's coming forth out of nowhere. That's sort of something like this blazing forth sense. And in other words, again, it's not something happening somewhere else at some other time. It's not something to think about. It's something about the nature of this very moment.
One way I want to bridge to our listeners here is, if you're having the thought, well, how does all of this help or inspire me, person who hasn't had this experience? One of the things I want to emphasize is the possibility that by hearing the description of these different phases of awakening, it could activate something in you. It could turn something on. If we're using this blazing forth, it could light some type of fire inside of you that leads to a blazing forth type discovery. And I wonder if you could each talk a little bit about that, the notion that as people are listening to this description of the many faces of awakening, how they can listen. Hameed, you said you like listening. I like listening too. But how do people listen in such a way potentially that it inspires their own unfolding journey?
I mean, I was going to say something before you said that, Tami, which is what we're talking about has to do with something that's needed by a human being to awaken to. So we're not talking about something that's just nice or wonderful, this and that. It's needed. I mean, people live in suffering, live in ignorance. They don't know who the hell they are, what reality is. People are lost, generally speaking. And people who come to a teaching, they know they're lost. And they want to find their way. And in a way, look at it, whichever way they found their way is good. They don't need to know about all these different things. I mean, it might be interesting for them at some point. But anyway, any path that is genuine, that leads to some kind of freedom and liberation, great. Just do it, do the practices, get into it, and find out who you are, what reality is. Whichever way you discover it is good. There are other ways, So we're suggesting, both Henry and I are suggesting, not to close our mind to just one way, but one way is good too. And I mean, most people, they just follow one way. It's just fine. It's enough for them. I mean, great masters developed just following one way and going deep and deep into it. That's wonderful. But we're opening up also the situation that there are many ways, many facets, different, and that just because we experience our awakening to be different from somebody doesn't mean we're wrong, doesn't mean they're wrong, doesn't mean somebody is better than the other. There are really different ways. And that's why it is needed by humanity at the present time, because of all the differences and how people think differences are bad, and trying to eliminate differences and make differences be a problem. Here, differences are to be celebrated. That's nature reality, that there are different nature reality, nature of the universe, nature of human being, that there are differences, different ways of being, different ways of experiencing, different ways of functioning. And the point that the whale has humanity to it, has heart to it, that there is compassion and love and sensitivity and caring. That's what's really common to all the different ways. They all lead to what's called in Christianity the virtues, which is humility, patience, and and compassion and tender. That's really important. That's what the human race needs. And so, in this perspective, in many ways of awakening gives us freedom to be different without being wrong and without being better or less. And that doesn't mean everybody just go whatever their experience is and they think that's it. No, you have to really ascertain it is really true, it is really genuine. It's not just a belief system. It emerges from beyond the mind, from beyond history. So if it's genuine like that, it could be whatever it is, and it has a liberating power, and it helps life, because life is, a lot of messes, a lot of suffering, a lot of trouble. I mean, the trouble is not necessarily going to go away, but there is more to life than that. There's an inner realm, inner way of experiencing oneself that has no disturbance, has no suffering, has more equanimity, more beauty, more peacefulness. And it's good to be able to have that place and to abide in it as much as possible in the midst of all the trouble of the world. The trouble of the world is not going to go away.
And then, Hameed, if you would continue, and the question that I asked about listening in such a way that our own inner spiritual journey is encouraged and supported to unfold. What are your suggestions about that?
I think, what I always recommend for people when they're listening is to not deny mind and knowledge, but to set it aside, just listen for a while and listen with your heart. Because teaching is not just words. There's more of the state itself is being presented. And if somebody is open, they might have a glimpse, they might have a taste, they might be impacted directly. So it's not just a mental knowing.
And then if for a moment, before we leave this notion of blazing forth, because I think this is a powerful face of awakening that Henry has named, at least for me, that I think could be palpable for people. And I wonder, Henry, say more, help us, take us there, if you will. Take us there.
I want to just say what a joy it is just to sit and listen to you, Hameed. I could do that happily for the rest of the morning. Beautiful listening to you, and I feel that you are indeed presenting, as you speak, and it's not just words. Let me just say, Tami, if I could, it's a beautiful point, and the fact that you bring it up right when you did is just kind of amazing, because actually the line that I was quoting, dwelling nowhere, mind comes forth. And let's understand mind in the sense of experience or perhaps awareness. But either way, this very moment is coming forth. Out of where? Where is it coming from? So here's the thing. There was a great Zen figure in the 6th century called Wei Nung, and he was the story behind him is that he was illiterate, and he was from an ethnic minority in China, and he was supporting his aged mother. He had only his mother, and in his family, his only family was his mother, and he supported them by collecting firewood. And he'd go off into the nearby hills and gather firewood each morning and bring it around to homes and stores in the town where they lived and sell little bundles of faggots, and make money that way. And he was delivering some firewood. This is the story, to a store, and the storekeeper happened to have a monk visiting who was sort of in the back drinking tea, and the monk started reciting a few lines of the Diamond Sutra, and Wei Nung, delivering the firewood, heard this particular line, dwelling nowhere, mind comes forth. He just heard it being chanted. He was 18 years old. He'd just delivered his load. He hears this line, dwelling nowhere, mind comes forth. And he suddenly just experienced it. He experienced what it was actually saying. He got that it wasn't a formulation of words, or it was a formulation of words, but they weren't as important as what they were talking about, which was not exactly contained in the words, but the words were from it, were suggesting it. And he got it. He got what it was pointing to, that this very moment, where has it come from? Where is it coming from? And then we might say, well, I mean, obviously it came from yesterday, or it came from a moment ago, or it came from, I traveled here from somewhere. Well, there's lots of ways our minds might go, but they're all part of this moment, and so if it's really just a matter of restfully listening and not trying to make sense of things, so as far as possible, sort of not computing, or sort of, wait a minute, what about this? What about that? Just almost, in Zen, they sometimes say, listen to a talk kind of in one ear, out the other ear. Don't worry too much about what sticks. Don't be trying to remember a bit. Oh, that was a good bit. Oh, I didn't understand that bit. Just let it sort of almost maybe just be like a river flowing, the sound of a river flowing by, or a breeze flowing through. And we just see what might, because nobody knows how and when we'll come home, and we're all doing it. We're all invited to do it all the time somehow, to come back to ourselves. And it's very easy for us to get caught up in so many things. There are so many worldly things we kind of project onto and get attached to. And there's also so many mental things that we can attach our sense of self to. But if we just kind of relax that hold and the attaching, and just kind of rest and just one little degree more open, I always think it's a matter of a tiny little adjustment, not some huge, massive turnaround. It can just be just a little tiny releasing, relaxing. There's a line that Dogen loved from an early Chinese master, Yao Shan. Take the backward step, just a little half step back, and then it turns the light around and shines it inward. And we suddenly, we just come home, come back to who we are. It's a very natural process. It's been built up in the West, I think, quite a lot as a sort of accomplishment, achievement, a sort of big thing to aim for, these awakenings. But I think in a way, it's the opposite. It's just releasing and relaxing and just for sort of coming back into who we've always been. And what that is, not one thing. It can show itself in different ways. But there's always some sense of a deeper reality, or a reality that's, Hameed put it perfectly, without history, and it's always been here. And it's like sort of climbing out of a roaring stream onto the riverbank or something. There are lots of ways we could analogize it. But, so I don't know, a few words on listening,
I want to pick up on something you said, Henry. You said we could talk about that later, which is this notion of one of the faces of awakening being nothing, not even consciousness. And Hameed, I've heard you talk about this as well as something that can be known and then understood in retrospect in a way. Because if there's not even consciousness there, how do we experience it when it's happening? And I have to say, this is one of the very mysterious, to me, faces of awakening, that I could know nothing, not even consciousness. I just go, what the heck are these guys talking about? So help me and our listeners to, if you will, the idea, can this be shown, pointed to right here? Help me.
I think the Buddha talked about that in his original teaching, about what he called it, the cessation of perception and sensation. That's one stage for awakening. Cessation of perception and sensation. No perception, no sensation. There's no consciousness. And it's clearly plays for most people. It means you be gone without knowing you're gone. Just like deep sleep, without being deep sleep, you're awake. But that is a stage, a certain way, or a certain step that happens. It has to do with the fact that we usually identify with a sense of self. And the consciousness we have is connected to a kind of sense of self, the ego self. And that to get to, for the awakened condition to show itself, that sense of self need to be out of the way. Because that sense of self is in the way, usually. And one of the main ways over to being out of the way is what's called death. It is a station. It dies. Doesn't mean die forever, but at least we have an experience of it being gone. And there are many ways of it being gone, but one of the ways is when consciousness itself, which is sort of the ground of all experience. Consciousness is the ground of everything. Perception, experience, feeling. So if consciousness ceases, then we don't know what's happening. We don't experience. And approaching it will feel like we're going to die physically. That I remember. I've had to go through that many times, and I see my students going through it. Terror, all kind of stuff that has to happen, and see our attachment to things, our sense of self, our life, the world. We have to let go of all of that, and then there is a condition of sort of dissolving to the point or not being aware of the dissolving. So that nothing there, and then coming back again and complete, usually when you come back, clarity and awakened to a different condition that doesn't include the self that has that dissolved. And that's one way that's known by many teachings, although some teaching are difficult. I remember having a dialogue with one teacher from Advaita Vedanta, and I said, no consciousness. He couldn't believe it. He said, no such thing. Everything is consciousness. I said, yes, but I think what he didn't. He thought I meant all consciousness, cosmic consciousness, and all dissolve. I didn't mean that. I meant the individual consciousness, our own individual sense of reality and perception that dissolves, and that's possible. And it can happen many times. In fact, that religion Buddhism called it a stream enter. That's you enter a stream through a cessation, through annihilation of consciousness, and you could do it many times. Stream enter can enter many times, until at some point you can rise from that place, can wake up while that dissolved, the self is still present, which is that's the emptiness, nothingness, or what I call a sense of non-being, complete non-being, that at the same time doesn't go away, is part and parcel of all expression of consciousness. It's the other side of consciousness, sort of the backside of consciousness, backside of awareness, which is more like being, like Advaita Vedanta called being, Satchitananda. And so non-being and being become one thing. But now we're getting to the subtleties of some of the possible states. One of the states of awakening is being and non-being are one. And all of reality is being, but its nature, underlying nature, is like nothing. Doesn't exist. It just appears that way, and it keeps appearing. It keeps effulging because it's not static. And that's the explosion. You could call it explosion. You could call it dynamic creativity. Sufis call it new creation. Each instant is a new creation. That's one way of experiencing it. I'm saying that one way because the other way is experiencing, awakening. That's what we started with before. But since you brought in this thing, the question about the emptiness and about the cessation of consciousness, that's my understanding, my experience of it.
Hameed, one question. When there's the cessation of perception and individual consciousness, what do you call the knowing faculty then?
There's no knowing. I mean, like deep sleep, not is no knowing. It's deeper than deep sleep. It's more cessation than that. Even in deep sleep, they can have some kind of awareness. Like when you wake up, you realize you're somewhat aware. Here, no, you don't remember anything, nothing. I mean, everything is completely gone. And it is so the chasm. I mean, Zen Buddhism have the zero circle, nothing there, and then from out of there comes everything, comes the world. But it is a specific experience. Many traditions have it, talk about it, and I think it's an important stage. It's not something you end up with. It's a stage of being free from the limit itself, and then emerge as the true nature itself, as being that and recognizing that being the nature of everything we have been perceiving before. And I wouldn't say, I used to think it's always there. I just haven't discovered it. I don't take that view anymore. It is there when it is there. The other time, who am I to say?
Well, let me ask you both a question, because Hameed, you said you work with students in this process and that often people feel some type of fear, or I would say terror, in the opening of this possibility in their experience. What would you say to someone who has entered the foothills of this, but they know it's their fear that's holding them back? I'm curious how you both work with students who report fear in this part of their journey.
I do something similar to what Henry does, which is just to be with it, not say yes or no to it, like any other thing that you work with. You're with it, let it reveal its nature, what's it about. And because if we stay with what is appearing in our experience, it will tend to reveal its meaning or where it's come from or its significance. And the fear will then show that there is an identification. If we stay with the fear, who's afraid? Are we afraid about? We find out who's afraid. There's somebody there, there's self that's afraid. And why is this self afraid? What about it? So that already, it is through understanding the fear, being with it, understanding it, the fear will end at some point.
Henry, anything to add there?
I think I would say exactly the same, and I might just add that at some point it's possible to meet the fear with compassion and thoroughly allow it and not welcome it and not be. That doesn't have to be a very active thing. It's just that, exactly as Hameed was saying, being with it. And it may be that at some point some kind of compassion joins in, sort of comes up by itself, and we feel kindly towards the fear, towards our suffering. And sometimes a little bit of love or compassion in the mix can be really helpful. It can sort of it can open things up. It's not the only way, but sometimes a little drop, I think it's like a teardrop from Kuan Yin's eye. Kuan Yin is the bodhisattva of compassion. One little teardrop might fall into our life, into our path, into our practice. And it can make all the difference, because we stop resisting, we stop striving, we stop thinking things have to be different, stop thinking that there's another way I should be, or there's another way it should be. And instead this beauty, the sweetness of compassion comes into our practice, and we might say, somehow this has been here all along and I didn't notice it, or now it's come, or whatever it is. And that can often be the thing that opens something up for us. And, in repeated ways, is sort of the moment when we're able to not seek for it to be different. And then it may show itself in a way we hadn't seen before, just because we're not trying to make it different. We're not trying to have it be different, And I mean, on the subject of, in some circles, it's called goneness. We talk about oneness. You can also add a G, and goneness, on the subject of goneness and thorough goneness, as Hameed was beautifully describing, when there really isn't even consciousness. And there's it's in the Heart Sutra. The Heart Sutra says that the awakening of Kuan Yin or Avalokiteshvara happened because they saw right through, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and consciousness. They saw that all were kind of constructions, all were appearances. And as appearances, as compounded things, they could be seen through, and to see that they were empty. And it's that's the pivot for Kuan Yin, according to the old story in Mahayana Buddhism. And I certainly, in my own biography, and to what little extent I've had a glimpse of that, it was a turning point to see that even consciousness somehow wasn't the end, actually, that even consciousness was somehow something appearing, and that there was a possibility of really of nothing. But when, in my own case, when I somehow fell into that or whatever, I couldn't know it. I wasn't there, and there was no consciousness to know it. But it was afterwards, it had turned something on its head. It had turned something around. When things came back afterwards, Hameed put it rather well. There was a clarity, and that something had gone that actually did not reconstitute. And I had never known that. I'd had a few, what to me were sort of powerful openings or moments of discovery in my life before then. But sooner or later, they all kind of faded, and some of my old troubles anyway came back. And I was working on different fronts, with Dharma, with meditation, and with therapy of different kinds, and relationships, work and creativity, working on several fronts. But in my biography, after one profound letting go of everything, that was a turning point that really did make a sort of lasting difference. And Hameed put it beautifully as well, with that knowing that sort of this being going on is always sort of backed by non-being. The goneness is here in all of this, and neither denies the other. That I feel really two faces of one fact: goneness and all this. And I don't know whether this is so easy to convey, but even right now, we're having this, I feel lovely conversation, very interesting, and a sort of to the heart of things. And certainly I hope it's interesting to listeners, because it's talking about our very own experience, each of us right now, that, sort of, is there a way that we're seeing, we're hearing, we're seeing what we're seeing, hearing what we're hearing, we're sensing the body somewhat, there may be thoughts now and then. But what if, again, what is it resting on? This sort of box of experience. What's beyond it? Is there somehow a way that it might all be appearing within something larger, or is it all coming out of a great nowhere? But here it is,
Bring back what you said, Henry, about the importance of compassion and love for that transition. Because a big transition like that, what's considered loss or something scary, definitely compassion and love is needed, because it's difficult to really make the transition if there isn't some kind of lovingness and compassion toward the self that is going to die, to feel kind toward it. And also compassion and love can develop to the extent that when they are established, they result in some kind of an implicit trust. Trust that whatever happens will be fine. And we need to have that trust to let the transition happen. We won't make it. We won't let it happen. We will hold on. We'll resist. If we don't have an inherent trust in reality that whatever happened in experience is fine. It's my experience. Whatever happens will be okay. But that is something that develops through practice. And different people have it to a different degree. What I call basic trust is not like trusting somebody, trusting just in reality, in the universe, and experience. It's and that's why an important practice. I think somebody need to follow a path, need to practice, and whatever practice for some time. Because practice develops many things, develops patience, develops fortitude, develops also compassion and kindness, opens the heart. All these are needed for those transitions to happen. So, sometimes transitions happen by themselves, but that's rare. For most people, practices bring out different qualities, different manifestation of our true nature, whether it's love or compassion or kindness, sensitivity, understanding, empathy, all of these things, and trust. And the trust is so fundamental. And I know, I've learned that different people have that. You have to have some kind of trust, otherwise you wouldn't live life. You'll die, But the trust can be big enough that we can allow ourselves to die inwardly and feel that it'll be okay. Just like you need to go to sleep, you need to trust to fall asleep. Without some trust, some people don't fall asleep. It's difficult for them to fall asleep. So there's some kind of trust. Sometimes happens through habit, throughout life, that you fall asleep, that you wake up. But it's a similar kind of trust, but it is more foundational, more basic, and for most people requires a great deal of practice for the heart to develop to the extent there's a trust that is beyond the mind. That's why I call it basic.
Oh my gosh, I completely agree. You put it so well. I think that's not often called out as one of the key sort of values of practice. It is exactly, I sometimes talk about practice as an arena where we can develop courage. But I think it's actually better put that it's about developing trust. I mean, courage may be in the mix as well, but courage may be a kind of form of trust that somehow we can ride over our fear. It's going to be okay. We're going to do it. But I think trust is a deeper way to put it. And the fact that, there's so much contemporary practice that is happening outside of training, individualistically. Like I do my mindfulness on my own. And I mean, I think it's a great thing that that's spreading, because I think by and large, it's good to be getting to know our nervous systems and getting to know our psychology a bit better, getting to know our emotional lives a bit better, and so on. But the traditional context where you have some contact with a teacher, you have some contact with fellow practitioners. It's, in the old view, you needed to have the three things. You needed to have your daily practice. You needed to have some guidance and some teaching that's not just guidance, but sort of framing what we're doing and recognizing some of the possibilities and recognizing some of the challenges and some of the pitfalls, the ways we can get stuck and so on. But also having a fellowship of others on the same kind of path in their own ways. Having those three things, traditionally, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, in the old Buddhist view, you need all three. And I think, again, that's in part because then you'll develop, sometimes they're called the paramitas, some of these virtues come forth, like patience, exactly, generosity, and sort of constancy or fortitude, as you put it. I mean, and compassion and trust. That we need to know that somehow, to get some hint already, some little inkling in some way, that we're already being held by something much larger anyway, and that the idea that we're clinging, we've been clinging to this piece of driftwood called me, as if it were all there is, just starting to get the sense of, oh my gosh, there's a larger context. There really is a larger context, and then at some point we can let go of the piece of driftwood.
Henry, I want to ask you a very direct and specific question, because as you were describing goneness, I got the feeling you were referencing a specific day that this occurred for you in your life. Like you had these other awakenings, and then on this day, something happened. Is that true?
I would say that I'd had definite kind of strong glimpses of goneness before, and I'd had some intimations and sense of goneness quite a bit in regular daily life and practice. But there was a particular moment. I know the day and the time, when I know the approximate time when, really, I sort of, if it weren't for the fact that clearly it wasn't physical death, but some kind of death happened. I just was utterly gone, and the whole world was gone. And there was just really nothing, not even consciousness. And somehow I was rather disoriented. Things started reforming, and I was all a bit of a topsy-turvy, and I couldn't do anything except laugh and cry, and I couldn't sleep. I was filled with a new kind of energy. I'd known this kind of energy before, but it was very sweet beyond belief and so beautiful. And for about 3 days, I just sat in it. And I was very, very lucky because it happened in the presence of my teacher. And he told me afterwards, he just left me. He had to go down. It was actually during a retreat, and he had to go down and do the closing ceremony. It was right at the end of the retreat when everybody was going to just say a few words and things. And he just left me in the little meeting room, laughing and crying, and I mean, I didn't know that then, but and then he came back maybe an hour later when they'd finished and sort of got me up, and I was just kind of, I was bewildered. And so I really can't say much about it now, except that when I was asked to say something myself at the closing lunch of this retreat, the only thing there was to say was thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I assumed, give it a day or two, I'll kind of be back to me with my anxieties and it just didn't happen that way. And so for me, the real, I don't know what to call it, a plunging, an immersion, a sort of more thorough dissolving than any I'd done before, any I'd been through before, in my particular biography, that was how I went over some kind of hump or turned some corner that honestly I've known that some people might have turned some kind of corner in their practice. I could see it in my teachers, and I could see it in a few other people that I knew and lots of people that I'd read. But I assumed it wasn't going to be for me because I was quite a troubled soul, albeit doing a lot of work on myself, But actually, something really did change, that even now hasn't closed again.
Hameed, you mentioned this notion of being and non-being as one. And I don't know if I know what you mean by non-being. I could guess, like not being solid, but then not, I don't know if I know what you mean. So I wanted to understand more. Well, I have a sense of being, presence, beinghood. I don't know. I feel I have some inroad into that. With non-being, I just go I'm back in the blackout space. I don't know what you're talking about.
Most people don't want to know about non-being. You want to know about non-being. It's a scary thing. Being, which turned out to be the essence of freedom anyway. But, what Henry talking about, the experiences of goneness, might clarify that some. For me, you were asking the question, it does happen in experiences, in the sense that, there is a gradual sort of erosion of the self, and there comes a point where it actually perceptibly, obviously, disappears in a complete way, and it's usually an experience. I have my students like this sitting with me, they're lying in the mat, and at some point, I'll be talking with them, and then at some point, they're gone, and I wait for them until they wake up. And in my experience, I've had many different those kind of experiences of goneness or cessation. There are many, just like in Theravada talks about stream enter, you could be enter the stream many times until you're in it. I remember one time, just to give you the example of how different it can happen. One way it happened one time is that I was doing some practice, all night camp practice, and at some point in the morning, I was observing, I was being aware of my mind and my personality, and I saw that it is completely deluded, and I couldn't think in any way that is not deluded. I thought it was hopeless. And like the way my mind, my responses, whatever, it's conditioned. And when it became very clear, it was like I could not get out of it. There's no way. It is all the network of my mind and thoughts, emotion, history, and all of that. All of it is really one conditioned structure. And basically, there was a giving up, not trying to do anything about it. When that happened, the giving up, that began a kind of experience, which is the experience of feeling something descending over. I was sitting up and I felt something descending over my head and dissolving it physically. It felt like as if my head was dissolving. And then as it descending and dissolving more and more of me, and after a while I could see and feel what was descending, what was coming down. It's like almost like rain or some kind of fluid descending. Turned out to be, it tasted and felt like honey. It's like sticky, sweet, yummy honey that was coming as it touches my body and my mind, they will disappear. And so I disappear in complete love and saturated contentment and bliss, and I was gone. It disappeared. It dissolved me. The love, which is love of being, not my love, something that emerged, dissolved the person, their mind, whatever. I don't know how long till I came out, and I came out in a condition of awakening. That's one kind. Another time, I remember I was, studying, practicing, whatever, my living room someplace. I was in Colorado, Boulder at that time, and I felt like I lie down in the living room and on the carpet, as I felt I was going to die. I mean, I said, okay, so I lie down to die, and I died. I was gone. No ceremony, no law, nothing. It's just lying down and gone, and then woke up again from that, and where everything was pure awareness and transparency. Now, the awareness and transparency, usually it is really complete when it is inseparable from the goneness, inseparable from non-being. Because the awareness has some kind of a presence, some kind of beingness. The world emerges as it is. The world is, I am. Everything is. At the same time, that isness is inseparable from something that negates the isness. The Tibetan call it the lack of inherent existence. Shunyata describes the lack of inherent existence. In the sense of there's no existence. And then, of course, I had many experiences of getting into that, but then the experience of waking up as the beingness that you talk about, and all of that, is one side. The other side can be, not always, but can be recognition of it's almost its opposite, its negation. Like, I call it absence. And that's my technical name for it, absence instead of emptiness or non-beingness. Non-beingness is absence, means it's absence of consciousness, absence of space, absence of everything. It's just absence of everything. And that absence makes the clarity of awareness searing, pure, because that absence clears up everything, dissolves everything that doesn't belong to the pure awareness. Dissolve everything from history, from mind, from belief, from ideas, whatever. And what's left is the beingness with its awareness. And then the clarity is, in some sense, complete. The transparency, everything is transparent. There is no individual here being aware of that. It's more like it's the universe aware of itself as pure, empty transparency. Empty here is emptiness refers to the non-being or to the absence. That's what I mean by it. And it is, it's a classical kind of experience, exists in many traditions. If you read Longchenpa about Dzogchen, he refers to it many places, and many traditions refer to it. And I don't necessarily take it to be the final, ultimate, or the only liberating thing. That's just one way of experiencing reality. Remember, we're coming back to different ways of phases. This is just one way. It happens to be a classic in the spiritual traditions. The being and non-beingness be inseparable. They're the same thing. And it is the nature of all what we perceive. Yeah, I mean, I heard of it. I've seen it. It's not my experience, but definitely that is one way it happens. The intensity of the loss can take, sort of project one, or they don't know, and then they might find themselves in a place like that. That can happen. And that's not that happens to some people. Usually, in most teaching, it's more the practice that brings it about. Practice leads to denudement of the self, so the self becomes so denuded, it becomes easier for it to somewhat disappear. But it can happen sometime in the midst of somebody suffering because of the intensity of it. I mean, I've read about it, seen it, but I wouldn't say that's the usual or most common way of that. And we're focusing on that. We don't need to focus on this, but this is just one phase of, one phase of awakening. But it's important. It's a classic. Many teaching talk about it, so it's good. It's good that we are discussing it.
Yeah. Tami, may I say a word on that topic? I mean, I agree with Hameed entirely, but what I've seen is that when somebody is faced with a grievous loss, and a catastrophic situation of some kind, there's something, I mean, many have said this, I think, but there's something about grief itself, that can be, if we surrender to it and let grief happen, when we find a way to really surrender to it can be like another kind of searing face of love. And I've seen that a number of times where really very, very difficult situations, parents losing children and things like that, where it seems unbearable. And it's beyond how do you navigate it? You can't exactly navigate it. But somehow if they learn or find a way to surrender to it, I mean, I think in a way it's analogous to the kinds of awakenings we're talking about, in the sense that they're outside what the self knows. They're sort of beyond what the self has constructed as its understanding of things. And it must be outside that. And somehow it's something greater, larger, sizeless, timeless, dimensionless, outside of the reality that we know, breaking in or breaking down the reality we know. And I think great loss has an analogous relationship to our self, in that it's sort of it's outside what we think we can handle, and therefore I think that might be sometimes how the mechanism works, of grievous loss. I have actually, I don't know if this is a little presumptuous of me, but I've got a little poem that is on the topic. Yeah, okay. It's called Frozen Lake. Frozen Lake, and it has an epigraph. It's not long. It has an epigraph from Sheikh Abu Sa'id, nobody, son of nobody, Sufi, who said, it's just a part of his life, the broken one. Allah says, the broken ones are my beloved. The broken ones are my beloved. Frozen Lake. When I think of friends who've been through the worst, through the dread love lives with, through the terrible fear anxiety can only dream of, I feel sorry for the rest, for those who had it all as they'd hoped, who crossed the frozen lake from one side to the other, never guessing the great dark beneath. But those for whom the lake cracks and opens, who fall into its unspeakable night while still walking upright in the light of this world, whose hearts burst and meet its waters. For them there is no consolation, nor is any needed.
That's wonderful. I like that. Yeah, it is part of the Zen tradition. The Hawaiian Buddhism emphasized that. It's called the teaching of totality, Hawaiian. But, it appeared in this teaching by itself, unbidden, unexpected. I was mostly into what we were talking about, the emptiness and clarity, whatever, and at some point something else happened, which is like, in the sense, the non-dual sort of expansive awareness and presence and emptiness. The whole universe is sort of, it's infinite, and its infinity is all reality. And then you realize the thing happened is like as a collapsing of all of that. It's like me as a particular contains the whole universe, contain everybody and everything at all times. And so I am myself at all times. I am everybody else at all times. Everybody else's experience at all times. It is, so it is basically the technical way of saying it is each point of time and space includes all other points of time and space. And it is an experience, experiencing oneself that way, experiencing reality that way. And we're not, I am everything, but each point, you are everything and everybody. And it is a different facet of reality. True nature reveals that possibility, which wasn't obvious in the thing we were talking about. You see, here it's like thing that turned around, and this is just as real and just as liberating. And I don't know if nobody else talk. Usually, at the present time, teachers who don't talk about it. They talk more non-dual, which is what we've been talking about before, is the dominant thing. But like Plotinus referred to it. The Hawaiian Buddhism referred to it. Different. Even Dogen, I think, talked about it. The whole world contains all locations. Here, there's only one location. Like a space becomes one point, if we could call it, but that point is not exactly a point. So uni-local is one location, one locale where everything is in one place. And you call the point, you could call the particular. It's mostly the person recognizing themselves as they don't have to get big to become the universe.
I totally agree. I think that's actually quite a common experience in the Zen world, actually. Mm-hmm. That people, there's all these little stories, in the koans of Zen, which Dogen loved, by the way. He collected hundreds of them, wrote about lots of them. But there's, for example, there's one where there's this master who the only way he'll teach is just by holding up one finger. Mm-hmm. And we take it to be that's what he's teaching, that this one point is everything. So there's one thing to experience that everything is one, but it's another thing to experience that one is everything. Yeah. And actually, my own very first awakening when I was 19 years old, without any practice, out of nowhere, was that I was exactly as I was. I was inseparable from the whole universe, and actually dropped into this sort of level of experience where this very pocket of consciousness was the very ends of the universe. It included absolutely everything, and so it was a great relief to me to find Zen that understood that. Years later, and I think we could go on. I think there are many ways that this reality we're talking about as what we awaken to, it simply shows up in different ways. And I find that the insistence these days on it's just one all-inclusive awareness, that's what it's all about. It just doesn't do justice to the many ways that it can show up. There's a way sometimes in Zen where it's not about one awareness, it's about one body. You feel unmistakably that your very body is it is the great body of all things. And there's Zen poets and adepts who said, my mountain is my thigh. The forest is my tongue. They're trying to convey that perhaps it's another framing or another face of uni-locality, that this one body is actually, it includes the street outside. It includes the mountain a few miles away. It's a single one body. And sometimes sometimes it can be rather a physical thing, less an awareness, but an solidity, an actual solidity. And so, I don't know. I think it can show up different ways. But but all of them seem to be, I think probably they're all kind of freed up by the recognition that you're talking about earlier of the transparency, exactly, the transparency of appearances with somehow goneness as part of that. It's the other face of it. Things are appearing and they're gone. Things are gone and they're appearing. And it's not, we may get to understand it one by one, but it's not really. It's really both at the same time.
Yeah, people also want love. Love is they can understand love, awareness. So what's that for? Emptiness. What is that? But love, people want love, and there is true, real love, which I call non-dual love, which is instead of everything is clarity and awareness, everything is love. And that's basically recognizing that there is nothing that's not pure love. All sweet, everything sweet, all generous, all is effulging. So that's what that book was about, and it is a beauty to it. Love brings beauty, appreciate beauty, recognition of goodness, healing goodness. Like Kuntuzanko, all is good. Love shows it. It is really good because humans recognize good with love. How can somebody be good if they're not loving? So goodness and love go together. So I'm glad you had that thunderbolt of love and recognizing it's available. Yeah, love is the most available thing to a human being because we humans are characterized by heart. We are all sweet now. All of us now, we sit here, we are one atmosphere of sweetness.
I feel it's the most important thing about the practice, actually, is that it opens up love, and it can open it up infinitely. It can be that there's nothing but really that goneness is actually a sort of infinite love in disguise that's ready to give everything, that's constantly giving, constantly creating, constantly generous, and that everything is made of love because it's pouring out of what we can't know, what can never be known. And so this, and it's always this very moment. It's not down the road, and it's not next week. It's always now, here, that we can find this geyser of love, this eruption of love, and it looks like this very moment. It doesn't look like something else. And sometimes that would be a very challenging thing to say in some contexts, but somehow the heart of things, it seems to me, there's one empty, boundless generosity and love. So I mean, I agree with the statement, everything is made of love, and we can feel it here. It's sort of not an idea to be filed away for a future time. It's here that we meet it. As we see daylight outside or nighttime outside and objects in the room that we're in. It's all appearing as a kind of act of love.
So one thing to say about this awakening, that everything is love, is that most people, when they hear that, it will be easy for them to suspect it, to doubt it, because the world doesn't appear that way. It appears a world full of aggression and jealousy and fear and hatred. So how can it be all love? And so we need to say something about that. That's true. People experience about the world is also real. However, it's possible to experience. It is one way of experiencing things that is available to us, a human being, that we could go to a level of experience where everything appears as love. Just like everything can appear, like we know physically, everything is atoms or elementary particles. People don't question that anymore. We don't see them. The same thing. But here, in the experience, it's like you're able to see the elementary particles, which is the love. Even though everything is elementary particles, but the body has cancer and this and that. All of these happen. That doesn't change the fact that it's all made out of elementary particles. So it's good to add that caveat so that people don't just dismiss it as, oh, that's an imagination. It's a possibility for a human being to experience that. Everybody is, love is everywhere, and it's when we experience it, it is that way. But I don't assume that everybody who's having a suffering is all of that. They are love, but they don't know. No, they're not appearing as love, appearing as what they are.
Well, I thought Hameed was speaking to it beautifully. That for one thing, we might say is that when we catch glimpses of our infinite belonging, that we're not separate, and either that's through oneness or, in fact, through goneness. There's that sense, that when we are coming out of it just enough to recognize something consciously, we realize that inseparability brings on very often a sense of love. It really touches the human heart oh my gosh, it's sort of it's a kind of infinite intimacy, and and an infinite belonging, and it has an impact on us of a discovery. The discovery of that degree of belonging has an impact on our hearts and awakens love. But I think also it's at this deeper level, and it is exactly as Hameed was saying. Really, like, I think we can drop into reality at different levels. We can the same way that we could know, on the molecular level, on the atomic level, on the subatomic particle level, on the level of forces and dynamics and cosmic forces and geological forces and so on. It's sort of like that. This moment of our experience, we can know our experience on different levels, and I would say some of those levels, not just one really, are kind of infused with a sense of love. I think right down at the sort of generative level of the effulgence is, I think, probably rather like the blazing forth, that the Taoists talk about. Hameed's effulgence is probably rather, I'm not sure, that may be similar. That has a quality of, unconditional love in it, infinite unconditional love. So does discovery of oneness, non-separateness, and so on. So I think there are different sort of levels that of the way we can experience this moment, any moment, that may be sort of increasingly saturated a sense of unconditional love.
Very clear way of putting out the perspective of love. Everything is love. Putting it in context.
Well, I very much enjoy hearing you speak, Hameed, and being able to exchange with you and hear your seasoned, ever fresh wisdom.
Just being with you.
And if you'd like to watch Insights at the Edge on video and participate in the after-show Q&A session with our guests, come join us on Sounds True 1, a new membership community featuring award-winning original shows, live classes, community learning, guided meditations, and more with the leading wisdom teachers of our time. Use promo code PODCAST to get your first month free. You can learn more at join.soundstrue.com. Sounds True, waking up the world. The Sounds True Podcast Network.